Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we're heading over to Japan to take a look at their brand new energy plan.
Yeah,
This is the 7th Basic Energy Plan,
it is.
and it really lays out a vision for where Japan wants to go with their energy system all the way to 2040 and beyond.
Yeah. Looking ahead.
So, this plan really tries to tackle a big question that a lot of countries are dealing with right now.
Right.
Which is, how do you balance the need for energy security with economic growth and decarbonization?
It's a tough one,
Yeah.
especially for a resource-poor country like Japan.
Yeah, they import the vast majority of their energy.
Almost all of it.
And so this plan really, tries to come up with some interesting and creative solutions for that.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is they're not just looking at this as like an environmental issue or an economic issue. They're really looking at decarbonization as a key part of energy security.
Yeah.
It's about building a more resilient and independent energy system.
Yeah, and so they're not shying away from some of the big, topics that are out there, like nuclear power, for example,
Right.
which obviously has a very complicated history in Japan,
Absolutely.
especially after Fukushima.
Yeah, the shadow of Fukushima looms large over this whole conversation.
So how does this plan address that legacy?
Well, I think it's important to note that it's not just a reaction to Fukushima.
Okay.
It's about learning from the past, but also looking ahead to the future.
Right.
They are taking steps to decommission the plant they're talking about, starting to remove the fuel debris in 2024.
Okay.
But what I found really interesting is that they're also emphasizing the importance of safety above all else.
Yeah,
Really kind of doubling down on that commitment to, never again.
Right.
And that's not just about nuclear. It's about the entire energy system.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a foundational principle for this whole plan.
Absolutely. Safety first.
But as you mentioned, it's not just about Fukushima, right? There are all these other factors that are playing into this energy transformation.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a global energy landscape that's in constant flux right now.
Right, we've got the war in Ukraine.
Yeah,
We've got instability in the Middle East.
exactly. And those events have really exposed the vulnerabilities of Japan's reliance on energy imports.
So they're really feeling the pinch of those global events.
They are. They're feeling it in their wallets. They're feeling it in terms of energy security.
Yeah, so this is a really critical moment for them to be rethinking their energy strategy.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into some of the specifics of what they're proposing here.
Okay.
One thing that really jumped out at me was this idea of a multi-layered approach to energy supply.
Right. It's not just about picking winners and losers. It's about recognizing that different energy sources have different strengths and weaknesses.
So it's not just like an all renewable or all nuclear strategy. It's kind of like a mix of everything.
Yeah, it's a balanced approach.
Sure.
And they have this principle that they call S plus 3E.
S plus 3E.
Yeah. So safety first, obviously, that's the S.
Yeah.
And then the 3Es are energy security, economic efficiency, and environmental protection.
Okay, so they're trying to hit all of those goals simultaneously.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot.
So let's talk about some of the specific energy sources that they're looking at here.
Sure.
I know we've talked about nuclear, but what about renewables?
Oh, they're going big on renewables.
Yes, they are.
Especially solar.
Yeah.
I mean, they're talking about a massive expansion of rooftop solar,
Okay.
especially on public buildings.
Yeah, and they're not just talking about like the traditional silicon solar panels. They're also looking at some of these next generation technologies.
Right, like those perovskite solar cells.
Yeah, perovskites, those are supposed to be like super efficient.
They are. They have the potential to be a real game changer.
But they're still kind of in the early stages of development, right?
It's still early days.
So it's a bit of a gamble, but it's a gamble that they're willing to take.
Yeah. I mean, if they can crack the code on mass production and bring the cost down, Japan could really become a solar superpower.
Yeah, it's a pretty bold vision.
It is.
So solar is a big part of the plan. What about other renewables, like wind, for example?
Wind is another big one, especially offshore wind.
Yeah, it makes sense. They're an island nation, after all.
Exactly. They have a lot of coastline and a lot of wind potential.
Okay, and they're not just talking about like the traditional fixed bottom offshore wind turbines. They're also looking at floating wind farms.
Right. Those are really interesting because they can be deployed in deeper waters.
So they can tap into even more of that wind resource.
Exactly.
That's cool. What about geothermal? I know Japan has a lot of volcanic activity.
Oh, yeah. They're sitting on a geothermal gold mine.
Yeah, so they're going to be tapping into that.
Absolutely. They're planning to quadruple their current geothermal output.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It is, but they're also putting their money where their mouth is. They have this initiative called the Geothermal Frontier Project.
The Geothermal Frontier Project, what is that?
It's basically a way for the government to help mitigate the risks of geothermal development.
Okay.
Because exploring and tapping into geothermal resources can be expensive and uncertain.
Right.
So the government is providing financial and technical support to kind of reduce those risks and encourage more investment.
So it's like they're giving geothermal a little bit of a boost to help it reach its full potential.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got solar, we've got wind, we've got geothermal, we've talked a bit about nuclear, but what about fossil fuels?
Yes, the elephant in the room.
I mean, they can't just get rid of fossil fuels overnight, right?
No, it's going to be a gradual transition.
Okay.
They're phasing out inefficient coal plants,
Okay, that's good.
but they're also looking at replacing some of those aging plants with newer LNG-fired plants.
LNG, so natural gas.
Yeah, natural gas.
But isn't that a bit contradictory? I mean, they're trying to decarbonize and they're building new gas plants.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Remember, they have this huge surge in electricity demand coming their way.
Right, from all the digitalization and electrification.
Exactly. And they need to make sure that they have a reliable power supply during this transition period.
Okay, so it's kind of like a bridge fuel.
You could say that.
Yeah.
But they're not just relying on natural gas as is. They're also looking at incorporating decarbonization technologies into those new plants.
Okay, so things like carbon capture.
Exactly. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage.
And they're also investing in hydrogen, right?
Yes, hydrogen is a big part of their long-term vision.
Okay, so they're really trying to cover all their bases here.
It's a multi-pronged approach to decarbonization.
But I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed here.
I don't blame you.
It's like they're trying to do a million things at once.
It is a very ambitious plan.
So how do they plan to manage all of this? I mean, how do you even begin to implement something this complex?
Well, that's a great question, and that's what we're going to dive into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so stay tuned.
We're going to be taking a closer look at the electricity grid.
The grid.
Yeah, because you can generate all the clean energy in the world, but if you can't get it to the people who need it, it's all for nothing.
That's a good point.
Mm.
So we'll see how Japan plans to upgrade and modernize their grid to handle all of these new energy sources.
That's right.
All right, well, I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Me too. All right, so we're back, and we're ready to tackle the next big piece of this energy puzzle.
The grid.
The grid, yeah.
You know, I think a lot of people don't really think about the grid.
Right, it's kind of like the unsung hero of the energy system.
Yeah, it's just there in the background.
But it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the circulatory system of our energy infrastructure.
Exactly. And in Japan's case, they're trying to revamp their circulatory system.
To handle a whole new kind of energy flow. Exactly. They're moving from this system that was built for centralized power plants, mostly fueled by fossil fuels, to one that's going to be much more decentralized and reliant on renewables.
Right, much more dynamic.
Yeah, a lot more moving parts.
So what are some of the key changes that they're talking about making to the grid?
Well, I think the biggest one is this move towards what they call a smart grid.
Okay, smart grid. What does that actually mean?
Well, it's kind of like taking the existing grid and giving it a digital upgrade.
Oh, so that's like the Internet of Energy.
Exactly. It's about using sensors and data and communication technologies to monitor and manage the flow of electricity in real time.
So it's like a much more intelligent system.
Way more responsive.
Okay, so it can react to changes in supply and demand much more quickly.
Exactly. It's about balancing the system dynamically.
Okay, can you give me an example of how that might work in practice?
Sure. Let's say it's a sunny afternoon, and all those solar panels that we talked about are cranking out electricity.
Yeah, okay.
But maybe demand is low because people are at work or school.
So what do you do with all that excess solar power?
And you want it to go to waste.
Exactly. So that's where energy storage comes in.
Okay, so like giant batteries.
Yeah, think of it like giant batteries for the grid.
Okay.
They can absorb that excess solar energy when it's abundant and then release it back into the grid when demand spikes.
Like in the evening when everyone gets home and turns on their lights and appliances.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's how they're handling the times when there's too much renewable energy. What about the times when there's not enough?
Like if it's a cloudy day or the wind isn't blowing.
Right.
Well, that's where those LNG-fired plants that we talked about come into play.
Okay, so they're still relying on fossil fuels to some extent.
For now.
As a backup.
Exactly. It's about having that reliability factor.
Okay, but it's not just about the supply side, right? They're also looking at ways to manage demand.
Right. Demand-side flexibility is a big part of this.
Okay, demand-side flexibility. What is that?
Well, it's basically about shifting energy consumption to times when renewable energy is more abundant.
Okay, so give me an example.
So let's say you have an electric vehicle,
Okay.
and instead of charging it during peak hours when everyone else is using electricity, you charge it overnight when demand is lower and electricity prices are cheaper.
Okay, so you're kind of smoothing out the peaks and valleys of demand.
Exactly.
So it's a more efficient use of the grid.
Absolutely. And it's also good for your wallet.
Okay, so we've got smart grids, we've got energy storage, we've got demand-side flexibility. What else are they doing?
Well, they're also investing heavily in new transmission lines.
Okay, why is that important?
Well, remember, Japan has a very diverse geography.
Yeah.
Some areas are great for solar, other areas are better for wind or geothermal.
Right.
So they need a robust transmission system to connect those resources effectively.
So it's like building the energy superhighway of the future.
Exactly.
Connecting all these different renewable energy hubs.
Right, and this is especially important for offshore wind.
Okay, why is that?
Because a lot of those offshore wind farms are going to be located far from the coast.
Right where the wind is strongest.
Exactly. So they need to build long transmission lines to bring that power back to shore.
That makes sense. But I have to admit, this all sounds incredibly expensive.
It is. It's a massive undertaking.
So where are they going to get the money for all of this?
Well, they're going to need a combination of public and private investment.
Okay, so it's going to be a partnership.
Exactly. And they're going to need to create a favorable investment environment.
To attract those private investors.
Right. That means providing clear regulations, predictable policies, and some level of risk mitigation.
Because these are long-term investments.
They are. We're talking decades.
And the energy landscape can change a lot in that time.
It can and it will.
So there's a lot of uncertainty.
There is. But I think Japan is recognizing that this is a necessary investment in their future.
Yeah, it's about creating a more resilient and sustainable energy system.
Absolutely.
But it's not just about the money, right? There are also some serious technical challenges.
Oh, yeah, this is cutting edge stuff.
Integrating all these new technologies, managing the variability of renewables, ensuring cybersecurity.
Right, it's not easy.
And let's not forget about the social and political challenges.
Yeah, we talked about public acceptance before.
Right, not everyone is going to be thrilled about having a giant battery storage facility or a high-voltage power line in their backyard.
Exactly. So there's a lot of community engagement and education that needs to happen.
To build support for this transition.
Absolutely.
So it's a complex undertaking.
It is very complex.
But it's also incredibly exciting.
I think so, too. It's like they're building the energy system of the future.
And they're doing it in a way that's both ambitious and pragmatic.
Yeah, they're not afraid to think big, but they're also being realistic about the challenges.
So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Absolutely. This is a story that's still being written.
But one thing's for sure, Japan is definitely a country to watch in the global energy transition.
They are. They're really pushing the boundaries.
Okay, so we've talked about the grid. We've talked about the challenges. What's next?
Well, in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to zoom out a bit
Okay.
and look at the broader implications of Japan's energy transformation.
Okay, so like the economic impact.
Exactly. And their role in the global energy landscape.
And what lessons other countries can learn from their experience.
That's right. So stay tuned.
Okay, so I've spent the last two parts really digging into the nuts and bolts of Japan's energy plan.
All the different pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, and it's a pretty ambitious puzzle.
It is.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about the bigger picture.
The so what?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what does all of this actually mean?
Right.
For Japan, for the world, for, the average person.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's not just about technology. It's about people.
Right.
It's about how this energy transition is going to affect our lives.
Okay, so let's start with Japan. What are some of the potential benefits of this energy transformation?
Well, I think one of the biggest benefits is going to be increased energy security.
Okay, we talked about that before.
Right. They're really trying to reduce their reliance on energy imports.
Which makes them vulnerable to global events.
Exactly. And that's not just about economics. It's also about national security.
Right.
So by developing their own domestic energy resources, they're creating a more resilient and independent energy system.
So less reliance on those volatile global energy markets.
Exactly.
Okay, that's energy security. What about the economic impact?
Well, I think there's a lot of potential for economic growth.
Okay, how so?
Well, for one thing, this transition is going to create a lot of new jobs.
In renewable energy manufacturing, installation, maintenance?
Exactly. And it's also going to stimulate innovation.
Right. Japan is already a leader in a lot of clean energy technologies.
They are. And they're investing heavily in research and development.
So they're really positioning themselves to be a major player in the global clean energy market.
Absolutely. They see this as a huge economic opportunity.
Okay, so we've got energy security, economic growth. What about the environmental benefits?
Well, that's kind of the whole point, right?
Yeah, decarbonization.
Yes, exactly. By transitioning to a cleaner energy system, they're going to significantly reduce their greenhouse gas emissions.
Which is essential for mitigating climate change,
Absolutely. And it's also going to have a lot of co-benefits.
like cleaner air and water.
Exactly. Healthier ecosystems.
So it's a win-win.
It is in many ways.
But of course, there are also challenges.
There are always challenges.
We talked about some of them before.
The cost, the technical complexity,
Yeah.
the need for public acceptance.
And the fact that the world is changing so rapidly.
Right. We're living in a very unpredictable time.
So there's a lot of uncertainty.
There is. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for Japan.
To be adaptable.
Exactly. To
Yeah.
be flexible and adjust their plans as needed.
Because things are going to change.
They will,
Technologies will evolve. New challenges will emerge.
and they need to be prepared for that.
So it's not just about having a plan. It's about having a plan that can evolve.
Exactly. A living document.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential benefits and challenges for Japan. But what about the broader implications for the world?
Well, I think Japan's experience is going to be closely watched by other countries.
Right, because they're kind of a test case.
Yeah, in a way, because they're facing a lot of the same challenges that other countries are facing.
Like resource scarcity, growing energy, demand the need to decarbonize.
Exactly. So if Japan can successfully navigate this energy transition, it could provide a model for other countries to follow.
A roadmap for the future.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be having these conversations, to be sharing knowledge and best practices.
Because we're all in this together.
We are. This is a global challenge that requires global solutions.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Okay.
What role do you see yourself playing in this energy transition?
Yeah, because it's not just about governments and corporations. It's about all of us.
Right, what choices are you making in your own life
What can you do to reduce your energy consumption?
to support clean energy?
To advocate for change.
Because every little bit helps.
It does, and it all adds up.
So that's our deep dive into Japan's energy future.
I hope you found it informative.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.